Hello, my name is Seán Allan, and I'm a professor of German at the University of St Andrews, and I hold a position at the University of Bonn as well. For many years now, I've been researching into East German cinema, and it's a great pleasure that on the 27th of January, we're going to be, which of course is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we're going to be screening a classic of East German cinema, Konrad Wolf's film from 1959, Stars, or Sterne, as it was called in German. So Konrad Wolf, who was born in 1925 in a small town in Stuttgart, became, I think, what many people would regard as one of the leading filmmakers in East Germany, or the German Democratic Republic. He came from a Jewish family himself. His father and mother were both very committed communists, so much so that at the age of 17, he emigrated from Nazi Germany in 1933 and went to the Soviet Union. There, he joined the Red Army, and as a 19-year-old, he returned to Hitler's Germany, fighting in the Red Army. Just to clear up one minor misunderstanding, he is in no way related to the East German writer Konrad Wolf, whose very famous novel, The Divided Heaven, he did, however, make into a film. His father was a playwright, and his play, Professor Mamlock, was also made into a film by his son Konrad. But perhaps more famously, he had an elder brother called Markus Wolf, who was in the East German Politburo and has had a reputation for dealing with the exchanges of spies during the Cold War. Now, Konrad Wolf had trained at the Moscow Film School, and so in a sense he was the ideal figure for post-war Germany, or at least the reconstruction of post-war Germany in the East, or the Soviet occupation zone, of course, as it was known then. He had absolutely no involvement in the Nazi film industry. He was a committed communist. He was untainted by fascism and had actually fought in the anti-fascist forces in the Soviet army. So in many ways, he's a key figure because he has the ideal biography. And for the Soviets and the East German government in the late 40s and the early 50s, the big problem was how to make a new start in East German filmmaking. And there, of course, the obvious problem was that everybody who knew their stuff in terms of filmmaking had been trained under the Nazi film industry. Konrad Wolf, of course, was the great exception, and this, I think, gave him a particular license, particular freedom to actually push the boundaries further than many other filmmakers could. The film Stars, or Sterne, that was made in 1959, I think it's a very, very important film in the history of German cinema, because in some people's eyes, it is the first film to address the issue of the Holocaust in either East or West. Personally, I don't quite agree with that assessment, because I think Kurt Metzig's Marriage in the Shadows could also be cited in this kind of context. But nonetheless, it is very much a kind of landmark film. And I think perhaps in order to understand some of what's going on in that film, we need to look a little bit at some of the context of it. Because when in the Eastern Bloc, the Holocaust had a particular kind of positioning. And I think that many people accused the East Germans in particular of not really addressing the issue of the Holocaust. Now, of course, I'm delighted to say that we're going to be talking to Elizabeth Ward, whose book, East German Cinema and the Holocaust, is a landmark work of study of this particular area, and I think she's going to be able to tell you much more about this than I can. But what I wanted to highlight in particular is the way in which that for the governments of Eastern Bloc countries, the official doctrine was, of course, that the primary victims of the Second World War were Soviet soldiers who had been slaughtered in their millions, and not Jews. But in order, again, I think to appreciate this, we need to think about what fascism means in an Eastern Bloc context. And it means, I think, something quite different than in Western discourse. Because whereas in Western discourse, fascism and Nazism is a kind of psychological state of mind, in the Eastern Bloc discourse, fascism is, if you like, a form of extreme capitalism. It reflects the belief that capitalism in its extreme form always tends towards fascism. So the way of analyzing fascism and its relation to the Holocaust, of course, I think has a very different kind of resonance. But nonetheless, I do think that despite the emphasis on Soviet losses in the Second World War, the balance, if you like, is corrected by Konrad Wolf, who redirects the focus onto Jewish victims and in particular the Holocaust. Now, I think this film is set in Bulgaria. It's set in Bulgaria in a fictional town, I think called Blensko, in 1943. In order perhaps to understand the film better, it's helpful to know that, of course, Bulgaria at the start of the Second World War was a neutral country. And then after 1941, it signed up to the Tripartite Pact that allowed German soldiers to traverse the country in order to help with the Italian invasion of Greece. And so to the export, obviously, of prisoners of war and, of course, the transport of Jewish victims to the concentration camps in Auschwitz was permitted through this. There were no concentration camps in Bulgaria itself. And in the film, what we see is the German Walter, who is sort of overseeing a transit camp that is en route for taking Jews, Sephardic Jews from Greece to the concentration camp in Auschwitz. What the film presents is a kind of conversion narrative of an individual, but it's a narrative that people from both West and East can identify with. And I think this is what really made the film so successful internationally as well, because when it was screened at the Cannes Film Festival in 1959, it was awarded the Prix du Jury, which is not quite the Palme d'Or, of course, but it is sort of the next best thing for a very highly innovative kind of film. And I think that it's not only the kind of absence of heroic figures of the anti-fascist resistance that made this film so remarkable. People couldn't understand that this was an East German film. How could an East German film not have this very dogmatic, political, didactic thrust? People asked themselves at the time. And I think if you look at I think there are two reasons for this. One is, of course, the script by Angel Wagenstein, who was a Bulgarian, who was involved in this Bulgarian-German co-production. And I think the other reason is, if you look at is the remarkable visual language of this film. I think we're very used to this kind of thing now, of course, because we've all seen many Nouvelle Vague films. But if you were sitting in a cinema in 1959, I think you'd have been quite astonished at the sort of visual language that's used, the use of montage, the use of interior monologue, the juxtaposition of particular kind of scenes and the editing of the film. All this, I think, was pretty groundbreaking in 1959. And one of the reasons, of course, why the Cannes jury singled this film out for particular praise. So I hope that this might have stimulated your interest to come and see the full screening of the film in a restored version on the 27th of January at 6 o'clock. And that will be followed by a question and answer session with Elizabeth Ward and myself, and throwing the discussion open to the audience to hear your impressions too.